Lecture 14, Exodus, the foundation of the Jewish people.
The book of Exodus begins with the Hebrews in Egypt. Generations have passed, perhaps comparable to the 400 years that was told to Abraham. But generations have passed, and there rose up a Pharaoh who did not know the people of Joseph. He no longer held them in favor. And so they were made into slaves, just as God had foretold, and forced to work, building the great storage cities that were certainly built historically under Ramses II. And they were made to work hard, and their punishments were cruel, their wages and food very slim indeed. And of these Hebrews, the number had become so great that we are told that Pharaoh even put out an order to put to death all of the young Hebrew babies born. And one such baby was saved by his sister and mother. They put him in a little basket. Does that sound a bit like our story of Sargon? Covered the basket with pitch so it would be waterproof and set it adrift. And there it was discovered by the daughter of Pharaoh. And she said, I'm going to save this little baby, but I need someone to nurse it. And the sister of the young baby was there and said, well, my mother can do it. And thus, young Moses was saved and raised up, however, not as a Hebrew, but as an Egyptian, and lived at the court of Pharaoh, not knowing that he was a Hebrew. The very name Moses is not Hebraic. It is a standard Egyptian name, Moses. We find it often attached to forms of gods, like Thutmose, one of the most famous and victorious conquering pharaohs of Egypt. Thut has brought me forth. Thut, the god of wisdom, has brought me forth. Amun-Moses. Amun has brought me forth. I am the child. But this is just simply Moses. And whether or not there was an original Egyptian god attached to that, we don't know. But it made Sigmund Freud ponder whether or not Moses might have been from the very beginning an Egyptian. However, as he grows up, he watches this cruel punishment of the Hebrews that's made ever harder upon them. They now not only have to build, but they have to gather their own straw to mix in with the clay that they make the bricks out of. And you can still see workers in Cairo and throughout Egypt making those same kind of mud bricks, taking the clay and mixing the straw in. Some things never change in the Middle East. And the Hebrews were oppressed, and Moses saw a Hebrew being beaten, and he killed the man. And when some other Hebrews came up to him and he chastised them, they said, what, are you going to kill us the way you did the Egyptian? So he knew he would be a wanted man, and he fled out into the desert, fled out into the traditional home of the Hebrew people, where he became a wandering herdsman, married, and there at the age of 80, for age is no hindrance in the Bible. Abraham is 100 years old when he brings forth the son Isaac. And figures like Noah lived to tremendous ages. So he's 80 years old. He would, in other words, not be the sort of young dynamo that a company would be looking for as its new CEO to bring all kinds of new cutting-edge ideas to it. He's 80 years of age, and he's out looking for sheep. And he comes upon a marvel, a bush that is burning. And a voice booms out, "Take off your shoes. You are standing upon holy ground." Moses takes off his shoes and asks, "Who are you?" "I am who I am." And there you have one of the most dramatic statements of the difference between the polytheism of the Greeks or the Mesopotamians and the single God of the Hebrews. I am who I am. And the Greeks and the Mesopotamians as well saw their gods as having many of their own characteristics, such as committing adultery. And they were fairly easy to talk to and pray to. But the God of the Israelites, the God of the Hebrews, is totally other, absolutely different from humans. I am who I am. You do not need to ask any further. I am the God. What do you want with me? You are to go back to Egypt, and you are to bring my people out. No, I really can't do that. I'm 80 years old, and no, I can't speak well. No, you will go back into Egypt, and you will bring my people out. How will I even get access to Pharaoh to try to achieve this? I am who I am, and I will make this possible. Well, again, I'm not a good speaker. Then I'll send your brother along with you, Aaron. But you are going. And so off they go. And God does get them access to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said, "What are you talking about? Let these people go. They're my slaves. I can't have that kind of loss of human resources. No. Who are you anyway? Why, I've got magicians here at my court that can overcome any magic you might bring from this God of yours." Pharaoh doesn't necessarily deny that a God has sent Moses, but can't be nearly as powerful as the gods of Egypt. But in trial after trial, Moses overcomes. Then he warns Pharaoh, "Unless you let the Hebrew people go, plagues will be sent upon you." All right. So the water of the Nile turned like blood. Still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he said, it's just a natural phenomenon. And then the frogs began to overrun Egypt. Now, it is simply a fact that sometimes the Nile does turn red, and at that time, frogs seem to get an increased ability to reproduce, and lots of frogs are produced. Not that we want scientifically to try to explain these miracles, because a miracle cannot be explained scientifically. That's why it is a miracle. There are all these frogs all over Egypt, and then they die. And of course, this huge stench fills the land of Egypt. But still, Pharaoh will not listen. Then a huge plague of gnats. And if you've ever been in Egypt, out excavating, or just sitting on a terrace of a hotel, the gnats can indeed become overwhelming. And there are times, one particular year could be far worse with the gnats than others. Then plague of flies. And then a cattle disease, which the cows sicken. Then terrible boils all over humans. And the plagues thus continue and continue. A plague of locust strikes. And locusts do strike in Egypt. And not only in Egypt, there's a wonderful monument in Salt Lake City to the grasshoppers, that plague that came roaring in and nearly destroyed the Mormon crop, was miraculously removed. And then came not just the locust, but hail. From time to time, Pharaoh would seem to be willing to let the Hebrew people go, but no, this was a clash between a god, Pharaoh, and some god he knew nothing about. And how many times through history have mighty rulers thought that they were like gods? To the Greek, that was the height of hubris. But no, he was God. They called him the good God, and so he would stand up. Finally, a darkness filled the whole of the land of Egypt. Then, unless you let them go, God will kill the firstborn son of all the Egyptians. The Hebrews were warned. They were to slaughter a lamb and on their doors to make the proper markings with the blood of that lamb. To eat that lamb roasted only with a few herbs, to bake flat bread that wouldn't take long to cook, and eat that first Passover meal. Passover, because on that terrible night, God killed all the firstborn of the Egyptians, and the Hebrew children lived. Now, that is the fundamental event that begins the history of the Hebrews as a free people. Yeah, scholars can deny this. They can say it's all just a story. Why would such a story endure down through the centuries and still today, in the year 2011, be celebrated by Jews all over the world? No, to the Jews, to the Hebrews, this was real history. This was the foundation event of their nation, just as much as the Declaration of Independence is the foundation of our nation. So the Jewish people believed that this happened. And finally, Pharaoh could no longer hold out. And he said, let them go, get them out of here. And so they, led by Moses, they went out of Egypt. But Pharaoh changed his mind again, hard-hearted, and sent his army, and himself, we're told, after the Hebrews. And they came, in the account, to the Red Sea. We can have all sorts of pseudoscientific explanations. The Hebrews simply thought it was a miracle that God had opened up the Red Sea. They passed across on dry land. And then when Pharaoh and his chariots, and certainly no scholar can deny that the army of Pharaoh had chariots, when the chariots came, the waters rolled back over them, and they were drowned. Now call that just an invention, a story created centuries later. But it is interesting that in the views of most scholars, perhaps the oldest single line in the Testament, of the Old Testament, is the song celebrating this victory. I will sing praise unto the Lord. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. I will sing praise to the Lord. He is the Lord mighty in battle. He is our God. Very archaic Hebrew, celebrating this event that, again, for the Hebrew people, was real history and the proof that God had chosen them. But the Hebrews are no different than any of us. You're on a journey and people begin to ask, are we there yet? Where are we going? Does anybody know where we're going? What do we really know about this Moses? And they gripe and, of course, run out of food. And even when God supplies them with food, they're still dubious about this. You know, we ought to go back into Egypt, because there at least we were well treated and had something to eat. On they go. And they have been foretold that they might wander for 40 years. But they wander, and they come deep in the Sinai desert to the mountain that we could still go to, Greek monastery there at its foot, going back to the earliest days of monasticism. Climb up the high steps to Sinai, where Moses went, leaving the people of Israel, the Hebrews, behind in their camp, and there receive the 10 Commandments from God. Scholars may want to doubt all of this. We can simply say that to the Jewish people through the centuries, this story of Moses going up to Sinai and receiving directly from God the Ten Commandments has conveyed the most profound truth of the covenant between God and his chosen people. We might just, as an aside, mention that the Hebrews weren't alone in this view. The Law of Hammurabi, our first real law code, is the picture on it, the image on the code, right before the laws are given, is that of the god Shamash giving this law to Hammurabi. So Mesopotamian, a Babylonian, would not have thought it's impossible that the prophet would go up to the mountain and get the word from God. And what were those commandments? I am the Lord thy God. I brought thee out of Egypt, out of the land of bondage. You will have no other God before me. So there, God has brought them out of Egypt, and he is their God and their only God. You will have no other God before me. So it is the dictate of an absolute monarch to this people. And we talked about the term liberty and how in Mesopotamia it can mean a gift from an all-powerful king to his people, like liberation from taxes for a year. But it is also a gift that can be taken back. And this part of the Ten Commandments is pure factual ideas within the society of Mesopotamia. It speaks exactly to the Mesopotamian idea of freedom, that God or the king gives you this and can take it back. So God is saying, so that is, in other words, we're putting it into a historical context. God is saying, you must obey me or you will lose your freedom. And then, you will make no graven image. Absolute prohibition of all images of God. For how dare you try to represent what God looks like? You cannot paint the Sistine Chapel with God breathing into Adam, reaching across to touch him. God is too holy, he is too sacred, he is too totally other to be represented by the human hand. You shall not take my name in vain. Well, I guess we could go and look at all these commandments. You shall have no other God before me. I think in our own modern society, even those who profess to be Christians frequently put career or even family before God. And two, graven images. Well, so fixed was the idea of Greek beauty and the statues of gods like Zeus and Hera that Christianity itself violated from very early on in its history this prohibition on graven images. And third, do not take my name in vain. I ponder this whenever I walk across campus or even walk through an airport. Being of my age, I sometimes forget and think these people are actually talking to themselves, but they're talking into these phones. And their constant degradation of God and the words they use implying the name of God are just, to my mind, depressing. And God's name is too holy. And frequently, it is not even expressed in the writing of the Scriptures, but rather by circumlocutions. So the name of God is a great power to invoke with and to be held sacred in the Ten Commandments. And you should keep the Sabbath. Work 6 days, but the seventh turn over to me. That is, 1 day a week, you should think about God and your relationship to him. To us, the Sunday has just become another day to go shopping, a great day to have sales, watch football. But we have lost sight of, and I think it's a real loss, the idea that one day of the week you ought to keep just for what is really important. Maybe that's your family. Maybe that is taking care of your elderly, sick neighbor. But one day a week, keep for solitude and help rather than worrying about money and consuming and making headway at work. Not bad commandments still today. So the first 4 of these commandments deal with your relationship to God. The 5th, honor thy father and mother. Your parents are the bridge between God and how you deal with other people. They are right below God in the scale of what is sacred and holy. I do not think you will find a society, historically at least, where the parents are not to be honored by their children. So honor your father and mother. Then, do not kill. And I believe that's exactly what the Hebrew means. Do not kill. Do not take life. Do not commit adultery. Now, adultery can be defined differently in every society. The Hebrews themselves, the patriarchs, had several wives or concubines. But do not break faith with those to whom you have pledged your trust. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Again, in terms of the universal validity of these commandments, I would challenge you to find a society, historically, that permits stealing and doesn't condemn it. Do not bear false witness. Don't lie. That's particularly alien concept for us today because we live in a society where there is no such thing as real truth or even real lying. The only problem is when you're caught lying. But in the 10 Commandments, it is an absolute value. Do not bear false witness. And finally, don't covet. Don't be jealous of your neighbor's possession. And the 10 Commandments already recognizes that jealousy is one of the most evil, consuming forces in the world. So do not be jealous. So these were the commandments that he brought down. Today, you will get in trouble if you were to display them in a schoolroom, if you were to display them in a federal courtroom in a state like Alabama, let us say. There would be a huge uproar. Yet to the founders of our country, the 10 Commandments were not limited to any one religion. The founders of our country believed that those 10 Commandments were a fundamental statement of natural law, of what was held to be absolutely wrong in all societies, in all places, and in all times. All societies have some form of God, some belief in God, and the belief, as George Washington said in his farewell address, that liberty, religion, and morality are all inextricably bound together. You cannot have morality without religion, and you cannot have freedom without morality. Genghis Khan, the greatest mass murderer in history, in his code of law for his empire, his yasa, starts off by saying, I don't care what God you believe in, but every subject of my vast realm must believe in God. And then honor your father and mother. Well, as we said, every society has that. Every society has its prohibition of killing. Now, each society may define that differently, but the random taking of life is prohibited. Adultery, again, societies will define what adultery is, but breaking faith with those to whom you have given your trust in matrimony is condemned. Stealing, we have seen. I think being jealous bearing false witness. The liar is not welcomed in any society. And finally, jealousy, coveting what is not yours. So I believe you could get a group of Christians, Protestants and Catholics, a group of Jews and Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, even atheists perhaps, to sit down and find that in the Ten Commandments there were several values that we could all endorse. So from being just an event in the history of obscure people in the Middle East, the Ten Commandments still transforms societies and individuals in this 21st century. Moses comes down, of course, and the Hebrew people are always wanting to relax, slide back, and they've created a golden cow. They had perhaps learned to worship the goddess Hathor, the cow goddess in Egypt. Whatever it was, they were worshiping. And this began the strain in the Hebrew life that time and time again they would fall away from the commandments of God. And every time they would suffer, and every time God would give them one more chance. So they continued their march. Moses would never quite get to the Holy Land, to Canaan. He would die before he got there. But the Hebrew people themselves arrived in the land of Canaan, and led by their fierce warlord Joshua, they swept into the land of Canaan, and with fire and sword took back their homeland, the land where Abraham had once dwelt, the land that had been promised to them. And in fact, the archaeological evidence shows us that contemporaneously with what we might call the end of the Exodus, around 1210 BC, there is a prolonged period of warfare, burning, and destruction. But Exodus is the story of the Hebrew people forming their covenant with God, and God fulfilling that covenant by leading them right there to the Holy Land. Now, we can discuss the degree to which these events can be ascribed to real history, the degree to which they fit into the historical context of the Middle East in the latter part of the second millennium. But what is most important to us is how this tale of the Exodus, like the story of Genesis, conveys the highest moral values. The values of the Hebrew people, one, that they were unique, chosen by God. And all through history, the Hebrews have believed that they were chosen by God. Now, that choice by God may not always be easy on you. And no nation in its history has suffered more than the Hebrew people. But all through the ages, they have given their creed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one, and thou shalt love thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, and with all thy soul. And let me leave you with this question. Of all the people who have passed through the history of the Middle East, the Jews are unique in one way. You cannot find me someone who speaks Egyptian on a regular basis. I don't think you'll find many people worshiping Anubis in Egypt. I don't think you will find anybody who speaks Lydian or worships the Hittite god of the mountain. Only one people has preserved their language and still speaks it every day, has preserved their great book and reads it every day, and still worships the same God that Abraham worshiped. Is that just a coincidence?